Jenna Matthews stood at her front door, her fingers gripping the edge of the frame as she stared down at the official HOA notice in her hand. A familiar sense of frustration began to bubble inside her chest, the red ink on the paper burning into her eyes. Violation of neighborhood aesthetics. The letter accused her of having an improperly maintained lawn, a perfectly green, well-trimmed lawn that was the same as it had been for years. The only difference now was the HOA's ever-tightening grip on the neighborhood. A sharp bark echoed from inside her house, followed by a low growl, then silence. She glanced over her shoulder. Her two K9s, Max and Bella, sat just beyond the threshold, their powerful bodies tense, ears alert. Both dogs, trained for military operations, could sense her anger, their instincts as honed as her own. She tried everything, complied with every rule, meticulously trimmed her yard, kept her garage doors shut, even avoided the occasional neighborly debate that had started to feel like a full-blown war. But none of it had been enough for the HOA, led by Mrs. Jenkins, a woman whose obsession with control had become nothing short of tyrannical. Jenna's jaw tightened. She didn't mind standing up for herself, but the constant harassment had begun to feel like a personal vendetta. She could almost hear Mrs. Jenkins' voice in her head, cold and accusing. "You're a danger to the neighborhood, Jenna." The thought made Jenna's blood run cold. She wasn't a danger. They were the danger. A group of power-hungry individuals who had become drunk on their authority, who treated every resident like an obstacle to be bulldozed out of the way. The growl returned, more insistent now. Jenna turned and knelt beside her K9s, who were eyeing her with unwavering loyalty. Max, a hulking Belgian Malinois, was the first to nudge her hand. Bella, the quieter one but equally fierce, sat back on her haunches, watching her intently. Jenna's heart softened. She wasn't alone in this fight, not by a long shot. She had her dogs, and a history that none of the HOA members could even begin to understand. She stood up and crumpled the letter in her hand. The loud crack of the paper breaking through the silence was like a signal. Enough, she thought. She'd been patient long enough. But today, the threshold had been crossed. She wasn't just some homeowner anymore. She was someone who had fought wars, someone who had been trained for combat. And those HOA goons had pushed her too far. "Max, Bella," Jenna whispered, her voice steady, but a fire igniting deep inside her. "It's time they learned what happens when you mess with me." The dogs' ears perked up, their bodies coiling with restrained energy. They knew the signal. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with anticipation. Max and Bella weren't just pets. They were extensions of Jenna's will. The world had no idea what they were about to unleash. As Jenna took a deep breath and turned to face the street, her eyes narrowed on the distant figure of Mrs. Jenkins, who was now approaching her property with an air of smug certainty. Another confrontation, another demand. But this time would be different. This time, she wouldn't just back down. This time, the dogs would be unleashed. And when they were done, Jenna would make sure Mrs. Jenkins, and the whole HOA, understood exactly who they were dealing with. The morning after Jenna's confrontation with Mrs. Jenkins, she could feel the change in the air. It wasn't just the crispness of early spring, or the way the neighborhood birds seemed to sing louder. No, it was something more subtle, something far darker. As she stepped out into her driveway, the sun was already burning away the early fog, but the quiet unease that had settled in her chest refused to lift. Her K9s, Max and Bella, stood by her side as she moved toward her car, their eyes scanning the street with military precision. Max, ever vigilant, sniffed the air, while Bella remained closer to her, just a hair's breadth from Jenna's leg. It was clear to Jenna that her dogs were on edge, and that only heightened her suspicions. She'd spent enough time in tense environments to recognize the feeling. They were being watched. Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that Mrs. Jenkins wasn't just trying to bully her anymore. The HOA's tactics were escalating. But this was something different. There was a shadow hanging over her house, an unseen force that was beginning to tighten its grip around her. She decided to take action. With a sharp motion, Jenna called the dogs to heel and got into her car, driving slowly through the neighborhood. It was early enough that most residents were still inside, but Jenna noticed the occasional glint of eyes watching her from behind drawn curtains. She had seen it before. The subtle way the neighbors had started turning against her, eyes filled with suspicion, whispers behind closed doors. But what had started as whispers had grown into a coordinated effort. Jenna wasn't just an isolated target anymore. The entire HOA seemed to be involved. As she drove past Mrs. Jenkins' house, she saw her standing in the front yard, clipboard in hand, giving instructions to a few other HOA members. They were watching her every move, their eyes narrowed in unison. It was more than just surveillance. It was like they were waiting for something, plotting their next move. And Jenna was certain it wasn't just about the property anymore. It was personal. She turned down a side street, intending to circle back home, when her phone buzzed in the passenger seat. It was a message from her old military contact, Sergeant Evans, someone she trusted implicitly. The message was brief but chilling. "They're not just the HOA. Someone's pulling their strings. Stay sharp." Jenna's pulse quickened as she absorbed the message. She knew Evans wouldn't send something like that without reason. He'd been through enough wars with her to know when something was off. Someone's pulling their strings. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute. There were larger forces at play, and they had targeted her for reasons that went far beyond petty complaints about her lawn. The dog's growls snapped her from her thoughts. Max and Bella had their heads turned toward a dark-colored SUV parked 2 houses down. The vehicle hadn't been there a few minutes ago. Jenna's instincts screamed at her to stop, but she pressed on. It was too dangerous to confront the situation head-on just yet. But her mind raced. Who was in the SUV? Was it just another intimidation tactic, or was someone watching her every move? The rest of the drive felt like an eternity. When she pulled into her driveway and parked, she turned to her dogs, who were now alert, their ears pinned back in warning. "Something's going on, isn't it, boy?" she murmured to Max. He responded with a low growl, and Bella shifted her stance, watching the street with predatory focus. Jenna stepped out of the car, every muscle in her body tense. The sensation of being watched was stronger now than ever. She glanced down the street again. Nothing out of the ordinary. But she could feel it, like a pressure building in her chest, like something was waiting to break. And then she saw it. A figure at the end of the street, moving between the houses, just out of view. The shadow moved swiftly, too quickly for an ordinary neighbor. Jenna's heart pounded as she turned back to the house, the door clicking behind her. Whoever was watching, Jenna knew one thing for certain. They weren't done yet, and neither was she. The sun dipped low over the neighborhood, casting long shadows that stretched across the sidewalks like dark fingers reaching out to touch Jenna's every move. The evening air was thick with the weight of anticipation, and the streets were quieter than usual, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. Jenna leaned against her kitchen counter, sipping her coffee, but the taste felt bitter in her mouth. Her mind was too preoccupied with the unsettling events of the past few days, the SUV parked on her street, the figure slipping in and out of sight, the message from Sergeant Evans, and most disturbingly, the sense that something far worse than petty HOA politics was coming for her. Max and Bella were curled up in the living room, lying in their usual spots, but they too were restless. Every now and then, Max would let out a low whine, and Bella's ears would flicker as though catching some invisible sound. Jenna had never seen them like this, on edge, alert to something she couldn't yet see. Just as she set her coffee cup down with a quiet clink, the doorbell rang, breaking the silence. Her heart skipped a beat. It was too late for a neighborly visit. With a steady breath, Jenna wiped her hands on her pants and walked to the door, her steps measured, calculated. She wasn't about to be caught off guard again. She peeked through the peephole. Standing on her porch was Mrs. Jenkins, looking more smug than usual, clipboard clutched tightly in her hands like a weapon. Behind her, a few HOA members lingered, their eyes darting nervously, as if they were unsure of what to expect from Jenna. Jenna had to hand it to them. They were persistent, if nothing else. With a slight exhale, Jenna opened the door, standing tall, arms crossed over her chest. "What do you want, Mrs. Jenkins?" she asked, her voice calm, though the fire that burned beneath it was unmistakable. Mrs. Jenkins didn't hesitate. "Jenna Matthews, we've had enough of your defiance. We've received complaints about your behavior, your dogs, and your overall lack of respect for our community standards. You've been warned. This is your final notice." Her tone was cold and threatening, but there was something else underneath it, a palpable sense of satisfaction. Jenna could feel it. Something more than just a neighborhood dispute was unfolding. It wasn't just about the dogs anymore. Mrs. Jenkins wasn't here because of the lawn or the excessive noise of her dogs. No, this was a test of strength. They were pushing her, seeing how far they could go before she snapped. But Jenna wasn't ready to give them the satisfaction of seeing her unravel. "Final notice," Jenna echoed, raising an eyebrow. "What does that even mean?" "You don't get to threaten me in my own home, Mrs. Jenkins, and I'm not backing down." The dogs behind her gave a low growl in unison, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Jenna could feel their tension too. Max was already standing at the doorway, his eyes locked on Mrs. Jenkins, a warning in his gaze. Bella's ears were pricked, her body coiled, ready to act at the slightest signal. Mrs. Jenkins' expression flickered for a moment, but she recovered quickly. "This isn't just about you anymore. This is about the neighborhood's safety," she said, her voice laced with false sweetness. "We'll be forced to take legal action if you don't comply." "You don't want to make an enemy of us, Jenna." Jenna's heart skipped again. But this time it wasn't fear. It was something darker, something that screamed challenge. This wasn't just a legal threat. It was the first hint of the power they thought they had over her, the control they believed they could exert with a few legal threats and whispered orders. "I've made my decision," Jenna said firmly. "You don't get to control me or my dogs. You've pushed me too far, Mrs. Jenkins. And now, I'm warning you. Stay away." The moment she said those words, something shifted. A cold, electric charge seemed to snap through the air between them. Max and Bella's growls deepened, almost as if echoing Jenna's warning. Mrs. Jenkins took a small step back, but her eyes narrowed in that all-too-familiar, malicious way. "Don't say I didn't warn you," she muttered under her breath before turning to leave. But before she could fully retreat, she shot one last glance over her shoulder, her voice barely audible. "You have no idea who you're messing with, Jenna. No idea." Jenna stood there, watching her retreating figure, but the words hung in the air, lingering in the space between them. No idea. As Mrs. Jenkins and the HOA members walked away, Jenna felt an icy chill settle in the pit of her stomach. This was far from over. And somehow, she knew that the worst was yet to come. The days following Mrs. Jenkins' ominous warning passed in a blur of tension. Jenna's routine was shot to hell. She found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, expecting something to happen at any moment. Every time a car slowed near her house, her heart would race, and Max and Bella would stiffen at her side. The neighborhood, once familiar and safe, now felt like a trap slowly closing in around her. It was late evening when Jenna finally couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling any longer. She'd been up all night, staring at the darkness outside her window, watching the shadows of her trees sway in the breeze. There was something out there, something she couldn't see, but could feel creeping ever closer. Max and Bella had been restless all day, their behavior more erratic than usual. They were on edge, growling at nothing, pacing the house as if they could sense the storm on the horizon. Jenna trusted her dog's instincts more than her own gut, and right now, they were telling her that the danger was real. But it wasn't just the dog's warning that bothered her. It was the strange feeling in the air, like everything was about to snap. Then, at 10:23 p.m., the power went out. Jenna froze. The lights flickered before dying, leaving her in near-complete darkness. For a split second, there was nothing but silence. No hum of the refrigerator, no distant sounds of traffic. Just stillness. Max's low growl broke the silence. Bella stood, hackles raised, her ears flat against her head. Jenna's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a power outage, it was coordinated. A soft click came from the front door, then another, and a faint scraping sound. Someone was trying to pick the lock. Jenna's heart pounded in her chest. She knew that sound all too well. The HOA had crossed the line from petty harassment to something far more sinister. They were coming for her. Her mind raced through the options. She could call the police, but the neighborhood was too isolated. They wouldn't get here in time. Besides, Jenna knew the HOA was more than just a group of homeowners. They were organized, with resources that went beyond what any local authorities could handle. She quickly moved toward the back of the house, her steps light but deliberate. Max and Bella followed, their ears tracking every movement outside, every creak of the floorboards. Jenna paused by the window that faced the backyard. The darkness outside was absolute, but she could just make out the shapes of two figures slipping through the shadows, moving low to the ground. Her gut tightened. They were inside the perimeter now. And this wasn't a random break-in. It was a coordinated effort, planned, methodical. It was a trap. "Stay close," Jenna whispered to Max, who was already positioned by the door, his muscles taut. Bella stayed by her side, her breath soft but steady. The figures outside had moved closer, and Jenna could hear the faintest crunch of gravel underfoot. The dogs were growling now, their bodies trembling with restrained aggression. Max and Bella were ready to fight, ready to defend. Without warning, the back door slammed open, and the first figure lunged toward her. Jenna reacted instantly, moving faster than the intruder could track. She grabbed the closest object, a heavy metal candle holder, and swung it in a wide arc, connecting with the intruder's jaw with a sickening crack. The man stumbled back, cursing as he reached for his gun. But before he could even draw it, Max was on him, his teeth sinking into the man's arm. Bella was right behind him, lunging for his leg, her bite vicious and unrelenting. The other figure was still outside, trying to sneak around to the front. Jenna wasn't about to let that happen. She yanked open the kitchen drawer, grabbing the nearest knife, and moved quickly toward the front of the house. The intruder was trying to make his way to the front door, clearly unaware of the danger lurking inside. But Jenna knew this was no ordinary break-in. This wasn't just about intimidation. They had come for one thing, to break her, to force her hand. But what they didn't understand was that she had already fought battles far more dangerous than this. Jenna crouched low, her breath steady, her eyes locked on the door. Every muscle in her body screamed for action. She would not back down, not this time. Not when everything she had worked for was on the line. The front door creaked open. The figure stepped inside, and Jenna moved like lightning, catching him off guard with a slash to his side. He staggered back in pain, and in that instant, she launched herself at him, using her military training to subdue him with a swift, calculated hold. The man struggled, but it was no use. The dogs had already incapacitated his partner, and now he was trapped, just as Jenna had planned. But as she looked down at him, the realization hit her. This wasn't just a warning. The HOA had crossed a line that could never be undone. And now, there would be no going back. The man's body slumped to the floor with a heavy thud, his breath ragged as he tried to recover from Jenna's tight hold. She knelt beside him, her ice cold, assessing. Max and Bella stood guard, their muscles still taut, ready to spring at any further threat. The only sound in the room was the man's shallow breathing and the faintest hiss of air from the broken window. But for the first time in a long while, Jenna's pulse slowed, her mind clicking back into focus. The intruder, his face bruised and bloodied, barely managed to meet her eyes as she loomed over him. He looked familiar, too familiar, but Jenna couldn't place him just yet. Something about the way he held himself, the way his eyes darted nervously to the shadows, told her that this was no ordinary thug. "You're not from the HOA, are you?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. The man's lips twitched, his eyes flicking to the door. He was trying to think of a way out, but there was nowhere to go. Jenna could see the desperation in his eyes, and for a brief moment, she almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "I don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Jenna's gaze narrowed. "Don't play games with me. I know this isn't just some neighborhood feud. Who sent you?" The man's expression hardened, and his jaw clenched. He seemed to weigh his options, but Jenna wasn't about to give him time. With a sharp motion, she grabbed his collar and yanked him up to meet her gaze. Max growled softly in the background, his hackles raised, a constant reminder of the danger in the room. "I'm not saying anything," the man spat, his defiance clear. Jenna could feel the rage bubbling up inside her, but she contained it. She wasn't going to lose control. Not now. She needed answers. "You think I care about your loyalty? You're in my house now. You're going to answer my questions." Before she could press him further, Bella growled and lunged toward the door. It was a flash of motion. Her eyes locked onto something, or someone, outside. Jenna's instincts kicked in, and she moved without thinking, grabbing the man's arm and pulling him toward the back of the house. "Stay close," she barked, her voice sharp with authority. But as she reached the back door, the sound of tires screeching on the pavement froze her in her tracks. The world seemed to slow as she whipped around, her heart pounding. Through the open window, she saw a dark sit-in speed away, vanishing into the night. A chill swept over her. It was a setup. This was bigger than the HOA. The figures from the street, the coordinated attacks, the cryptic threats, all of it was leading her to something far more dangerous than she had ever anticipated. Jenna's grip on the intruder tightened as the realization hit her. She was no longer just a target of neighborhood politics. She had been swept into something far more sinister. The HOA was just the surface. Beneath it, someone more powerful, more ruthless, was pulling the strings. And now, they wanted her. Jenna's pulse quickened. She had to know who was behind this. And why. Who was in that car? She demanded, her voice steely, as she pulled the man back inside, away from the open door. She shoved him onto the kitchen chair, her eyes burning into his. The man, pale and sweating, struggled to breathe. "I don't know. I swear, I didn't know they'd come for you. They said you were too dangerous, that you couldn't be left alone." Jenna clenched her jaw, trying to force the pieces together. "Who are they? Who wants me gone?" He didn't respond, his body trembling with fear, his eyes darting wildly around the room. He wasn't going to crack easily. But Jenna had ways of making people talk. She had the patience and the training to wear him down, and she wasn't leaving until she had answers. Just then, her phone buzzed on the counter, interrupting the tension in the room. Jenna turned toward it, distracted for a moment. The screen lit up, and her heart skipped a beat as she read the message. "This isn't over. They found out you're not just a civilian. Be ready. We're coming for you next." The message was unsigned, but the meaning was clear. Whoever they were, they had just revealed something she didn't expect. They knew her past. The military. Jenna's hand tightened around the phone as she realized the truth. This wasn't a random attack. They were hunting her, because of what she used to be, who she used to be. The figure in front of her flinched at the realization that dawned in her eyes. He knew, and he was afraid. Jenna stepped back, her breath steady despite the storm brewing inside. Her past, the one she had buried, was now a target. And it seemed her enemies weren't just the HOA. They were something much darker, much more dangerous. "Tell me who you're working for," Jenna said, her voice now a dangerous whisper, "or I'll make you wish you never came here." But the man shook his head, his lips trembling. "You're already too late." Before Jenna could react, he yanked a small device from his pocket, A simple black button. He pressed it. And the house went dark again. The darkness felt suffocating as the power cut once again. A heavy silence fell over the house, broken only by the shallow breathing of the man still sitting before her, fear evident in his wide eyes. Max and Bella growled low, their ears pricked, sensing the shift in atmosphere. The oppressive blackness pressed against Jenna's senses, and her heart rate surged. What the hell is happening? She reached out instinctively for her phone, but when she swiped the screen, it flickered, then went dead. The message was still there, the last cryptic warning lingering like a ghost. "They've found out you're not just a civilian." The words were haunting, each letter a reminder that someone knew exactly who she was, and they weren't just targeting her, they were after something much bigger. The intruder in front of her had gone silent, his fear now palpable, his body trembling. Jenna felt the shift in his posture. His muscles went taut, as though he, too, had heard something that made him nervous. Something wasn't right. He was no longer the main threat. There was something else at play. Someone else. Max barked, a sharp, desperate sound that pierced through the silence. Bella followed with a deep, ominous growl. Jenna's pulse quickened as she reached for the knife she had left on the counter, her grip tight. She could feel it, the presence of something far more dangerous than the man in front of her. "Who are you working for?" Jenna demanded again, her voice steady, but laced with an edge that made the man's eyes widen. "Answer me now, or I'll make you." But the man didn't respond. Instead, his gaze darted to the front of the house, and Jenna's instincts kicked in. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew what was coming. It wasn't him she needed to worry about anymore. The shadows at the door were moving. The faintest sound of footsteps, the echo of boots on gravel, told her everything. "They're here." Jenna took a step forward, eyes scanning the darkened doorway, every muscle in her body coiled, ready for whatever came next. Max and Bella had already moved to the entryway, the dogs instinctively positioning themselves between her and the threat. They knew something was about to happen. She didn't hesitate. She reached down and grabbed her flashlight from the kitchen drawer, flicking it on, the beam slicing through the darkness. Through the front window, she could barely make out the figures creeping through the yard. Silhouettes of men, shadows blending with the night, as they positioned themselves near the fence. There were at least 4 of them, all moving in synchrony. They were trained. Jenna's pulse pounded in her ears. Military. Jenna's stomach twisted. These weren't just goons hired by the HOA. These men, whoever they were, had come prepared. She could feel the weight of the danger bearing down on her. She had been in situations like this before. When the world went dark and the hunt began, there was no place to hide. The only choice was to survive. Her military training kicked in, and she was instantly alert. No more hesitation. No more games. She wasn't going down without a fight. "Max, Bella, stay," she ordered, her voice low but commanding. The dogs stiffened, their bodies taut with anticipation. Jenna moved quickly, silently, slipping toward the front door. She crouched low, her movements fluid as she crept toward the edge of the window. She could see them now. 2 men positioned by the fence, one in the bushes near her garage, and another at the back gate. They were surrounding her house. The trap had been set. The back door burst open suddenly, and another figure stepped inside, a shadow emerging from the dark like a phantom. Jenna's heart jumped, but she kept herself calm, every muscle trained to react at the right moment. She waited. Max growled, low and menacing, but Bella didn't make a sound. The hairs on the back of Jenna's neck prickled. The intruder stepped into the kitchen, moving quickly toward the hallway. But before he could fully make it, Max launched himself, snarling and biting down hard on the man's calf. Bella was right behind him, snapping at his arm, forcing him back into the doorway. "Move," Jenna barked, her eyes cold. She rushed forward, grabbing the man by his shirt and slamming him against the wall. With a hiss of pain, The man gritted his teeth and tried to break free, but it was too late. Max's teeth dug deeper into his leg, and Bella's relentless attack only made him struggle harder. Jenna tightened her grip on the man's throat, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Who are you working for?" Jenna demanded again. "Tell me, or I swear you won't walk out of here." But the man's lips curled into a grim smile. "You'll never make it out of this alive," he muttered. And with a flash of panic in his eyes, he pressed a small device against his chest, another black button, his final act of defiance. Jenna's blood ran cold as she realized the depth of the trap. He hadn't just come to invade her home. He had come to ensure she never left it alive. With a sudden, deafening crack, the house seemed to shudder. Jenna's heart pounded in her chest as the sound of the explosion rattled the walls. The house trembled, the floor beneath her feet buckling slightly as if the very foundation was about to collapse. The walls seemed to groan, and dust filled the air. Max and Bella were instantly on alert, their growls intensifying, but neither of them budged from their positions, their focus unwavering on the intruders. Jenna's breath was shallow as she spun toward the man she just subdued, still clinging to her grip on his throat. His body had gone limp, but his eyes, wide with terror, seemed to scream a silent warning. He had just activated something far worse than an emergency panic button. Her mind raced. "It's a bomb." The thought hit her with the force of a tidal wave, and she knew in that instant that the blast wasn't a random explosion. It was meant to trigger a chain of events that would force her hand, bringing her into direct conflict with whoever was behind this sinister operation. The attackers weren't just trying to break her spirit, they were planning to break her physically, to bury her beneath the weight of an impossible situation. She shoved the man to the ground, her mind already turning to the next move. Her eyes flicked to the front door, where the shadows outside had started to shift again. Another group of men had emerged, their faces hidden in the dark, but their movements calculated and precise. There was no escaping this, no running. They were everywhere. "Get up," Jenna growled, dragging the man to his feet. "What the hell did you set off? Talk to me." But he didn't answer. He didn't need to. He was just a pawn, and Jenna realized that now. The men outside, these weren't random hired guns. These were professionals, trained killers. Whoever was pulling the strings had resources far beyond her understanding. She'd been too focused on the HOA and hadn't seen the larger web closing in on her. Max and Bella were already in the hallway, watching the door. The dogs' bodies were still, tense, waiting for any movement. It was as if they too sensed that this fight was far from over. Jenna's breath caught as she listened. Footsteps at the back of the house, a flicker of movement through the window. Another figure, this one larger, wearing tactical gear. They were closing in on all sides. Her eyes darted back to the man she'd grabbed. His lips curled into a smile. "You think you can outrun them? You've already lost," he sneered, blood dripping from his lip. "They know who you are. You're not leaving here alive." She didn't waste a second on his taunting words. She needed answers, but right now, survival came first. The men outside weren't just closing in. They were taking their time, knowing she would be forced to make a move. This wasn't just a fight for her life. It was a psychological war. Tick, tick, tick. The sound of a clock echoed in her mind, a constant reminder that time was running out. She stepped back toward the back door, her eyes scanning the dark yard. A black SUV was parked outside, a shadowed figure crouched beside it, waiting for the signal. It was too quiet, too deliberate. These men knew exactly what they were doing. "Max, Bella, stay close," Jenna ordered, her voice commanding, but her mind was already calculating her next steps. The dogs obeyed, sticking to her side as she crouched low by the back window. She could see the SUV's tires turning slowly in the gravel, ready to make a quick getaway. Jenna's instincts told her that whoever was in that vehicle was going to be just as dangerous as the men in the house. They were her final obstacle. the one last thread she needed to pull on to unravel this entire nightmare. But how the hell do I get out of this? She wasn't going to wait to find out. With a snap decision, Jenna grabbed the knife from the counter, the cold steel familiar in her hand. She wasn't going down like this. Not without a fight. As the door creaked open, the two men outside finally advanced, creeping forward with weapons drawn, clearly expecting an easy target. But they didn't know what they were walking into. Jenna held her breath, waiting for the right moment. The first man stepped over the threshold. And that's when it happened. In one fluid motion, Jenna grabbed the closest object to her, a heavy vase, and threw it with all her strength toward the men. The vase shattered against the doorframe, a sudden distraction that gave her the split second she needed. Max and Bella charged forward at the same time, snarling and snapping at the men's legs, forcing them to stumble back, giving Jenna the opening to dive for the door, knife raised. The men barely had time to react. Jenna's body moved like a coiled spring, her military training taking over as she ducked under one man's arm and drove the knife into his side. He collapsed to the ground with a choking gasp. The second man reached for his weapon, but before he could pull it from his holster, Bella lunged, knocking him to the ground. Max was right behind her, his jaws clamping around the man's wrist, forcing him to drop the gun. But it wasn't over. The SUV in the driveway revved its engine, and before Jenna could catch her breath, the vehicle peeled away, kicking up gravel and dust in its wake. She cursed under her breath. They were escaping. But who? And what was waiting for her when they regrouped? Jenna stood still for a moment, her body trembling with adrenaline. The fight was far from over. Whoever had set this plan in motion wasn't finished. And now, the real war was beginning. Jenna's heart pounded in her chest as the sound of the SUV faded into the distance. She stood in the middle of the yard, breathless, her body trembling from the adrenaline, the weight of the past few minutes crashing down on her. The men were down, 2 of them, and yet the feeling of danger had only grown more intense. She knew they weren't the last. The ones who had been pulling the strings were still out there, watching, waiting. Max and Bella paced around her, alert, their fur bristling, eyes darting to the shadows. The attack had been swift and calculated, but Jenna wasn't about to let them win. Not yet. She wasn't going to sit around and wait for their next move. She turned toward the house, scanning the perimeter. Nothing but the flicker of broken lights, the faintest hum of tension in the air. But she could feel it, an overwhelming presence closing in. Whoever was behind, this wasn't going to stop until they had what they came for. "Stay close," Jenna murmured to Max and Bella, already heading for the front door. She glanced down at the unconscious man, still crumpled on the floor, and stepped over him. There was no time to waste. She needed to find out who was leading this operation, and fast. The house felt strangely quiet, almost eerily so, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She knew they had to be close. Too close. She stepped carefully, her senses sharpened. Every creak of the floorboards, every subtle shift in the shadows felt like a countdown to the next attack. When she reached the front window, she spotted them, the dark figures reappearing at the edge of the yard. But this time, there were more. A dozen at least, all moving with military precision, their faces obscured by the night. They were closing in from all sides, and she had no way of knowing how many more were waiting for her in the dark. Jenna felt a cold knot form in her stomach. The timing was off. This wasn't a random ambush anymore. This had been a carefully calculated plan, executed with brutal efficiency. The moment she had triggered the fight, it had started a chain reaction that led her right into the jaws of something much bigger. She wasn't just fighting for her life now. She was fighting for something much more important. Something they wanted. Her mind raced as she scanned the room. And then it hit her. The message on her phone, the one that had been left just before the power went out, the one that had mentioned her military past, the one that said, "We're coming for you next." They didn't just want her gone. They wanted her knowledge. It's the war plans, Jenna realized with a jolt. They know what I've seen, what I've done. Her heart raced, and in that moment, the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Her military service wasn't just a line on a resume. It was a key to something far more dangerous than anything she could have imagined. These men weren't just after her. They were after classified intelligence, information she had been exposed to during her service. Suddenly, the door crashed open with a loud bang, and Jenna spun around, knife raised, ready to strike. But this time, it wasn't an enemy soldier or another goon. It was a familiar face. A face she never thought she would see again. It was Nash, her former commanding officer, the one who had betrayed her, the one who had disappeared without a trace years ago, leaving her with the aftermath of a failed mission. He was standing in the doorway, his eyes cold, calculating. "Jenna," he said, his voice low, almost amused. "Did you really think you could escape this? Did you think we didn't know where you'd go?" Her grip on the knife tightened as she took a step forward. She knew Nash wasn't alone. His presence here, at the center of it all, made everything clear. He had been the one pulling the strings from the beginning. He was the architect of the entire operation. "You betrayed me," Jenna hissed, her words laced with venom. Nash's lips curled into a smile. "It wasn't personal, Jenna. It was necessary. The information you have, it's invaluable. It's worth more than your life. And now you've led me straight to it." Jenna felt the weight of the truth settle on her shoulders like a stone. She had been a pawn all along. Her past, the mission she had failed, had been the key to bringing her here, to this moment. The men in the yard, the ones who had been surrounding her, they were Nash's men. Every move she'd made had been part of the trap. She had unwittingly walked right into the lion's den. The silence between them stretched, and in the instant before Nash could make another move, Jenna acted. With a blur of motion, she closed the distance between them, spinning the knife in her hand, her body moving with deadly precision. She drove it into his side, not waiting for him to react. Nash gasped, his eyes widening in shock as blood poured from the wound. But Jenna didn't stop. She twisted the blade, her hand steady, her rage fueling her. "You won't get away with this," she whispered through gritted teeth, watching as Nash crumpled to the floor. His men outside hesitated, unsure of what to do, their eyes flicking back and forth between their leader and the woman who had just turned the tables. Jenna took a deep breath, her mind racing. She wasn't out of danger yet, not by a long shot, but for the first time that night, she had the upper hand. And she wasn't about to let it go.